The night was unusually still, with only the sound of wind rustling through the trees. In the distance, the flash of lightning lit up the sky, painting the clouds in a bright, eerie light. It was one of those nights when everything felt like it was on the edge of something big. And then something truly extraordinary happened. Far above the dense forest of Earth, in the quiet of space, an alien spacecraft was hurtling toward the planet. It wasn't a random occurrence. An unexpected storm in space had set the ship off course, and now it was plummeting toward Earth at an alarming speed. In the blink of an eye, the sky above the forest seemed to tear apart as the spacecraft struck the atmosphere. The ship burst into flames, trailing a fiery tail that could be seen from miles away. The explosion that followed was deafening, shaking the ground beneath, as if the Earth itself was quaking in response. A bright flash lit up the dark sky, followed by an eerie silence, the remnants of the craft crashing violently into the jungle below. Jake Carter, a former military medic, was sitting alone in his remote cabin, watching the thunderstorm. He enjoyed these quiet, solitary nights, with nothing but the storm and the occasional crack of thunder for company. The cabin was far from civilization, nestled in a secluded part of the forest, and he loved the peace it offered. He was lost in thought, sipping his coffee, when the sudden explosion broke through the calm. His heart skipped a beat as the blast rang out, shaking the windows of the cabin. The ground beneath him trembled, and the very air seemed to hum with energy. Jake leaped to his feet, his instincts kicking in immediately. His military training had taught him to act without hesitation in moments like this. Grabbing his flashlight and rifle, he dashed out the door and into the storm, his boots pounding against the muddy ground. The rain poured down in torrents, but Jake barely noticed. He moved quickly, heading toward the crash site, his mind racing with questions. What could have caused such a massive explosion? Was it some kind of military test? Or was it something else entirely? His heart was pounding as adrenaline coursed through his veins. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he knew he had to find out. As he approached the crash site, Jake's flashlight illuminated the twisted wreckage of the alien ship. The air was thick with smoke, and the scent of burning metal filled his nose. The ship was nearly unrecognizable, its once sleek surface now mangled and charred. Yet there was something strange about it, something that made his gut twist with unease. This wasn't a regular crash. It was something beyond his understanding, and that thought made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Jake cautiously approached the wreckage, his rifle raised, ready for anything. But then, out of the smoke and shadows, he saw something that froze him in place. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but as the smoke began to clear, he saw her. A figure emerging from the wreckage, moving slowly but determinedly. She was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. A woman, but not human. Her skin glowed with a faint ethereal light, and her eyes shimmered like the stars themselves. She was tall and graceful, her movements almost otherworldly, as if she was more than just a person. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he took in her appearance. She was wearing a sleek, high-tech armor that looked far more advanced than anything Jake had ever seen. The armor seemed to hum with energy, and he could see small lights pulsing beneath the surface. She was injured, and the sight of her wounds made Jake's chest tighten with concern. Her shoulder was badly burned, and there were strange, glowing cuts across her body, as if the very air had torn into her skin. The woman's lips parted, and she spoke in a language that Jake couldn't understand. Her voice was soft, but tinged with urgency, her words like musical notes that seemed to echo in the storm. She sounded pained, and Jake's instincts as a medic kicked in. He had to help her, whatever she was. She was clearly in distress, and despite the alien nature of her, something in her expression told him that she was not a threat. She needed help. Jake took a cautious step forward, lowering his rifle. He wasn't sure what to do, but he couldn't just leave her there, alone and hurt. He hesitated for a moment, trying to figure out what was happening. The woman, this alien, was barely standing, her body trembling. The wounds she had suffered seemed unnatural, like nothing Jake had seen before. His mind raced as he took in the sight of her futuristic injuries. Some of the wounds were bleeding, but others seemed to be glowing, as if her body was reacting to the damage in ways he couldn't understand. He needed to act fast. Without thinking twice, Jake carefully approached her, his medic instincts kicking in. He knelt beside her and placed his hand on her arm, trying to comfort her. Her skin was warm to the touch, and the glow beneath it pulsed like a heartbeat. She flinched at his touch, her eyes widening with confusion, but then she relaxed, sensing no immediate danger from him. "Don't worry," Jake murmured softly, his voice steady despite the wild circumstances. "I'm here to help you." The woman's eyes flickered with something that might have been understanding, or at least recognition. She tried to speak again, but her words were a jumble of strange sounds. It was clear she was in pain, and Jake could see that she was struggling to focus. He gently lifted her in his arms and made his way back to his cabin. He didn't know who or what she was, but he couldn't just leave her to die in the rain. As Jake carried her into the warmth of his cabin, he placed her carefully on the bed, his hands steady despite the uncertainty of the situation. He grabbed his medical kit and began to assess her injuries. The wounds were unlike anything he had ever seen. The skin around the burns shimmered, and the glowing cuts seemed to move beneath the surface, as if the alien physiology was responding to the damage in a way that was beyond his understanding. He used Earth's medicine as best as he could, applying salves and bandages, but there was something about the way her body reacted to the treatment that was strange. Her skin began to glow brighter, and she started to tremble uncontrollably. Jake paused, stepping back as he watched the alien girl react to the Earth medicine. It was almost as if the medicine was doing something to her, something beyond healing. A strange light danced in her eyes, and her entire body seemed to hum with energy, as if the treatment was unlocking something inside her. Jake's curiosity piqued, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was dealing with something far beyond his understanding. Who was she? Where did she come from? And what was happening to her? As he watched her, his heart raced, not just with fear, but with a growing sense of wonder. This encounter, this first contact with the unknown, was just the beginning of something that would change his life forever. Jake had just finished treating Zyra's wounds, his hand steady as he applied the Earth medicine. Despite the strange glowing burns and her alien physiology, the salves seemed to be working. Her breathing had slowed, and her tremors were less frequent. He stepped back, wiping his brow and letting out a sigh of relief. He'd done everything he could, and now it was a matter of waiting for her to recover. But as the minutes passed, Jake began to notice something peculiar. Zyra, though still injured, was now sitting up slightly, her body tense, as if she was hyper-aware of everything around her. Her glowing skin pulsed faintly with a strange energy, and her eyes, which had been unfocused before, were now locked onto him with unnerving intensity. She blinked, then slowly leaned forward, her movements almost predatory. Jake took a step back instinctively. He'd seen strange behavior before. He'd treated soldiers who were delirious from injuries or shock. But this was different. Zyra's gaze was almost too intense, her focus unnerving. She tilted her head slightly, sniffing the air, and Jake couldn't help but notice that she seemed to be focusing on him more than the surroundings. He cleared his throat, trying to break the awkward tension. How are you feeling?" Jake asked, his voice strained. "Can I get you anything? Some food? Water?" Zyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she moved closer, her body swaying slightly as if drawn toward him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something primal. She sniffed again, this time with more intensity. Her lips parted slightly, as if testing the air around them. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Are you okay?" he asked cautiously, unsure of what to make of her behavior. Zyra didn't answer, but she took a few more steps toward him. She moved with such fluidity, her movements almost hypnotic, as though she was studying him. Her eyes were locked onto his hands now, and there was an almost desperate hunger in her gaze. Jake froze. He wasn't sure what was happening, but something wasn't right. "Here, drink this," Jake said, grabbing a bottle of water from his bag and offering it to her. He had no idea how alien physiology worked, but he figured water couldn't hurt. Zyra's eyes briefly flickered toward the bottle, but her attention quickly shifted back to his hands. Jake's hand trembled slightly as he held the bottle toward her. "Food," he offered, pulling out a granola bar. Zyra's eyes darted from the food back to his hands. She didn't take either of them. Instead, she reached out and gently brushed her fingers across Jake's wrist, her touch feather-light but electrifying. He could feel the warmth of her hand through the fabric of his sleeve, and the sensation sent a strange shiver down his spine. The touch felt different. It wasn't just skin on skin. It was as if her very presence was penetrating deeper, stirring something inside him. Jake pulled his arm away quickly, suddenly uncomfortable with how close she was getting. Zyra's face twisted slightly, and for the first time she spoke. It wasn't much, a few words in a language Jake didn't understand. The words were soft, almost melodic, but they carried a sense of urgency. Jake's confusion only deepened. He couldn't make sense of her words, and the tension between them was growing thick. Zyra's gaze never wavered. It was almost like she was trying to communicate something beyond words. Finally, after a few moments of silence, Jake heard a strange mechanical sound. Zyra's arm twitched, and she reached up to her neck. A small device attached to her armor activated with a soft hum. It glowed briefly before producing a voice, an English translation. "I need to taste you." Jake froze, the words slicing through the tension like a knife. He stared at her, utterly stunned. "Wait, what?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and confusion. "Taste me." Zyra's eyes narrowed, her breathing steady but intense. She repeated the words in English, her voice tinged with something primal. "I need to taste you." Jake stepped back, his mind racing to make sense of what she had just said. The words hung in the air, heavy and incomprehensible. He looked at Zyra, who was still watching him intently, her gaze focused on his neck, his arms, his skin. It was as if she was studying him like prey, or worse, like food. "No," Jake said firmly, his voice shaking slightly. "Humans don't do that. We don't eat each other." Zyra tilted her head in confusion, still not understanding fully. She repeated the words again, but this time, her voice held a touch of frustration. She clearly wanted something from him, something she felt was absolutely necessary, but Jake couldn't wrap his mind around it. "Listen," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I don't know what your species does, but here, on Earth, we don't do that. We don't eat people." He repeated the words, hoping they'd register. He felt a sense of dread settle in his stomach. Was this some kind of misunderstanding? Or worse, some alien instinct he couldn't fathom? Zyra's body shifted slightly, and she closed her eyes, letting out a low hum. It was almost like a sound of frustration, but also one of longing. Jake wasn't sure. "Look, I don't know what's going on with you," Jake said, his mind still racing. "But whatever it is, I'm here to help. I'm not going to hurt you, okay? I'll get you some food, and you can rest. But you have to stop acting like that." He turned to gather some more supplies, trying to shake off the unease settling in his chest. But even as he moved, he could feel her eyes following him. That strange, desperate look never leaving her face. The tension between them was palpable, a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Zyra continued to watch him intently, her eyes flicking to his exposed neck as he moved around the cabin. There was an odd pull to her gaze, something that felt entirely outside the realm of earthly instincts. Jake had no idea what was happening, but he couldn't deny the sensation creeping into his own mind, the feeling of being drawn into something he didn't understand, something much bigger than either of them. As Jake returned to face her, his heart was pounding, unsure of what was coming next. Whatever this was, it was far from over. The strange, unsettling reaction that Zira had to Earth's medicine had unlocked something in her, something that Jake was only beginning to understand. The bond between them was only beginning to form, and it was clear that whatever lay ahead, it would change both of their lives forever. Jake had only just begun to wrap his mind around the strange situation with Zira when the first sign of danger appeared. The cabin, once a peaceful haven nestled in the woods, had become a strange battlefield, full of tension and unanswered questions. Zira, still recovering from her injuries, was sitting quietly in the corner, her glowing skin pulsating softly as she tried to regain her strength. Jake had been giving her space, unsure of what to make of her earlier behavior, but he couldn't help but feel an odd sense of responsibility for the alien woman. After all, she was a stranger in a foreign world. And yet, she had come to him, seemingly needing help. As they sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts, an unexpected sound broke through the stillness of the cabin. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it quickly grew louder. The subtle hum of something mechanical moving outside. The hairs on the back of Jake's neck stood on end. He turned toward Zira, who was now standing, her body tense and alert. Jake's mind raced. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low. Zira's eyes flickered with a mixture of concern and urgency. "They found me," she said, her voice shaky. "My tracking beacon, it's activated." Before Jake could react, the sound outside intensified, and a sudden thud echoed against the walls of the cabin. The windows vibrated from the force of whatever was outside. Jake instinctively moved to the door, rifle in hand, peering out into the dense woods surrounding the cabin. But he saw nothing. The hum of the machine grew louder still, and Jake felt his heart race. Whatever it was close. Too close. Zira's face twisted in fear as she rushed toward him. "We need to move," she urged, grabbing his arm. "Now." Jake didn't question her. He followed her to the back of the cabin, where the dense trees provided some cover. But before they could make it to safety, a high-pitched whine pierced the air. A sleek, dark shape shot from the trees, its cloaking device shimmering before it flickered out entirely. A drone. The metallic creature hovered silently above them, its design sharp and angular, clearly alien in origin. Jake's heart pounded as he realized the threat. It was armed and dangerous, with sleek, deadly weapons ready to be unleashed. The drone's sensors locked onto their position, and before Jake could react, a burst of plasma fire erupted from its cannons. The blast hit the cabin with terrifying force, and the walls shuddered, splintering with the explosion. "Move," Jake shouted, grabbing Zira by the arm and pulling her behind a tree just as another blast hit the cabin, sending splinters flying. Zira's face twisted with fury as she tapped a button on her wrist device. In the blink of an eye, a glowing energy blade materialized in her hand. The blade hummed with power, crackling with electric energy. Jake's eyes widened in surprise. He had never seen anything like it before. "Stay low," Jake ordered, his military training kicking in. He dropped to one knee and aimed his rifle, firing a few shots at the drone. The bullets pinged harmlessly off its reinforced armor, but it was enough to distract the machine for a moment. Zira moved swiftly, her energy blade flashing as she darted forward, slashing through the air with deadly precision. Jake followed her lead, his instincts guiding him as he moved into position. They had to work together if they were going to stand a chance. The drone retaliated, firing another burst of plasma, but Zira was quick. She dodged, her energy blade cutting through the air, striking the drone's metal body. The force of the blow sent sparks flying, but the drone wasn't defeated yet. It hovered in place, regrouping for another attack. Jake didn't waste any time. He reloaded his rifle and fired again, this time aiming for the drone's central core. His shot landed with a satisfying crack, and the drone shuddered, its thrusters flickering. but it wasn't enough to bring it down. Zira, her glowing blade still crackling with energy, charged forward, her movements a blur of precision. She slammed the blade into the drone's underbelly, the energy slicing through its armor like a hot knife through butter. The drone screeched in protest, sparks and smoke pouring from its damaged body. Finally, with a final deafening explosion, the drone fell to the ground, its mechanical parts scattering across the forest floor. Jake exhaled, his breath heavy, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He looked at Zira, who stood over the smoking remains of the drone, her energy blade humming quietly in her hand. Her body was tense, but there was a certain satisfaction in her eyes. "Nice work," Jake said, his voice breathless. He couldn't help but be impressed by her skill. "You weren't kidding when you said you could fight." Zira's expression softened slightly, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she lowered her blade and turned back toward him. Her face, once filled with fear, was now serious. "They'll keep coming," she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. "My people, they want me dead." Jake stared at her, confusion settling in. "What do you mean, your people? Who are they?" Zara looked away, her gaze distant. "I come from a civilization, advanced beyond yours in many ways," she explained, her voice strained. "But my people, they are fearful. They think that Earth's medicine is too dangerous. They believe I've betrayed them by seeking refuge here, and they want to silence me." Jake was stunned. He had no idea what kind of technology or civilization Zira was from, but the idea that an entire species could want her dead because of Earth's medicine was both horrifying and bizarre. He had never been part of anything like this. He was just a soldier, trying to do the right thing. "Why Earth? Why here?" he asked, still trying to make sense of everything. Zira's eyes flickered with emotion. I had no choice," she said quietly. "The medicine. It could save my people. I came here because Earth's technology is the only thing capable of helping them. But now, they will stop at nothing to destroy me." Jake's heart sank. He hadn't signed up for this. He wasn't a diplomat or a scientist. He was a soldier, trained to fight, not to negotiate peace with an alien race. But as he looked at Zira, standing there with her glowing skin and high-tech blade, he knew one thing. She needed him. "We'll figure this out," Jake said firmly. "We're not done yet." Zara looked at him, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with meaning. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. As long as the beacon was active, more threats would come. But for the moment, they had won. Together, they had fought back the shadow of death that had loomed over them. And now they had to prepare for the next challenge. The night was heavy with tension as Jake and Zira moved through the dense jungle. The only sounds that filled the air were the rustling of leaves beneath their feet and the faint hum of distant cloak drones. Jake's mind was racing, trying to come up with a way to get Zira off Earth before her enemies found them. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The odds were stacked against them. Zira's enemies were technologically superior, a ruthless alien civilization that had already sent advanced drones after her. Jake, on the other hand, was just a man with limited resources, no advanced technology, no reinforcements, just his military training and a strong will to survive. But he had one advantage. He wasn't about to give up. No matter how dire the situation seemed, Jake refused to accept defeat. He was going to fight. He had to. For Zira, and for himself. They stopped near a small clearing in the jungle, hidden from view. Jake crouched low, his eyes scanning the dark surroundings for any sign of movement. Zira stood silently beside him, her glowing skin blending into the shadows as she adjusted her energy blade, keeping it close. They were on edge, every little noise making them flinch. It wasn't just the jungle that was dangerous now. It was the aliens hunting them. Jake had been thinking. They needed a way to get Zira's damaged spaceship back into the air, and fast. The cloaking device on her ship had been critically damaged during the crash, and without it, they were sitting ducks. The aliens would easily track them down. So Jake had come up with a plan. Repair the cloaking device, use it to escape, and get to a safe location where Zyra could contact her people for help. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was the only chance they had. "We need to get to your ship," Jake whispered, his voice low but urgent. "If we can fix that cloaking device, we can disappear. They'll never find us." Zyra nodded, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I trust you, Jake," she said, her voice soft but filled with determination. "But we'll need to move quickly. The enemy's patrols are everywhere." Jake nodded, his fingers gripping the rifle in his hands. "We'll keep a low profile. Stay close to me, and we'll get through this." With the plan in place, they set off through the jungle, moving in stealth mode. The jungle, dense and alive with the sounds of night, was the perfect cover. But Jake knew it wouldn't last forever. They had to make it to the ship before the alien patrols closed in. They moved silently through the thick undergrowth, stepping lightly over roots and avoiding the loudest parts of the jungle. They knew that the aliens had cloaked drones patrolling the area, and if they were spotted, their chance of escape would be slim to none. Every now and then, Jake would stop, holding up a hand to signal Zyra to be still. They listened intently as the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Alien soldiers, undoubtedly searching for them. Zyra's enhanced senses could hear them too, her glowing eyes scanning the dark shadows between the trees. She could hear the soft buzz of a cloaked drone moving above them. Jake could sense her tension, but he knew they had to keep moving. They couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close to their goal. For what seemed like hours, they moved through the jungle, avoiding the alien patrols with precision. The air was thick with suspense. Jake could feel his heart racing as they approached the location of the spaceship. They were getting close, but so were the enemies. It was only a matter of time before they were discovered. Finally, they'd reached a clearing. Jake's heart pounded as he saw the wreckage of Zyra's ship in the distance, partially hidden under a canopy of trees. It was battered, its hull scorched from the crash, but it was still intact. The cloaking device was the key. They just had to fix it and get out of here. Zyra's eyes lit up as she saw the ship. "We're almost there," she whispered, but the fear in her voice was palpable. "We don't have much time. They're close." Jake nodded, his mind already focused on the task ahead. "I'll take care of the cloaking device. You keep watch." Zyra moved to a nearby tree, using it as cover while Jake crouched beside the ship, pulling open a damaged panel. The interior of the ship was a maze of advanced alien technology. Jake had no idea how it worked, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. He quickly began to inspect the damaged cloaking device, his military training kicking in as he tried to make sense of the alien systems. It was like nothing he had ever seen, but Jake was determined. He had to get this right. As Jake worked, Zyra's voice broke through the tension. "Jake," she said quietly, I want to thank you." He didn't stop working, but he looked up at her, meeting her gaze. "For what?" "For everything," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "You're helping me when you don't have to. You're risking everything for someone you don't even know. You're unexpected. I've never met a human like you." Jake's heart skipped a beat as he looked at her. He had always known humans were capable of great courage, but hearing it from Zyra, someone from another world, made it feel even more significant. "I'm just doing what's right," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "You're not alone. I won't let them take you." Zyra smiled, a small but genuine smile that made Jake's heart flutter. She stepped closer, her glowing skin reflecting the faint light of the ship. "Your courage, it's more than just admirable. It's attractive." Jake's face flushed, but he quickly refocused on the task at hand. "We'll talk later. Right now, we've got a ship to fix." The moment passed, and they both returned to the task at hand. Jake carefully adjusted the cloaking device, hoping that the modifications he was making would be enough to make it work. As he worked, he could feel the pressure mounting. They were running out of time. The alien patrols were closing in, and if they didn't finish this soon, their only chance of escape would be gone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake stepped back and gave the ship a quick once-over. "It's done," he said, his voice filled with relief. "We're ready to go." Zira nodded, her expression serious again. "Let's get out of here." Jake stood up, his rifle in hand, and they both moved quickly toward the ship, ready for whatever came next. But as they made their way toward the ship's entrance, the sound of footsteps and the hum of drones filled the air once again. The escape wasn't going to be easy, but Jake and Zira were ready to fight for their freedom, no matter what it took. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. And together, they would escape the shadows that hunted them. The air was thick with tension as Jake and Zira stood side by side, their eyes scanning the dark jungle around them. They had made it this far, but they knew their enemies weren't far behind. The cloaking device on Zira's ship was their only chance of escape, but they had to get to it first. They had no illusions. This was going to be their final stand. Jake's grip tightened on his rifle as he listened to the soft rustling of leaves. He could hear the faint hum of cloaked drones above, their silent presence a constant reminder of the danger surrounding them. They were not just being hunted. They were outnumbered and outgunned by an alien force with technology far beyond anything Earth had. But Jake was ready. His military training had prepared him for moments like this. Even if he had never imagined he'd be fighting alongside an alien fugitive. He could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but there was no turning back now. Zira stood next to him, her glowing skin casting a faint light in the dark jungle. Her high-tech armor shimmered under the moonlight, and her alien energy blade pulsed with power at her side. She had proven herself time and time again since the crash. But now, more than ever, Jake knew that she was the key to their survival. The sound of approaching footsteps shattered the silence. The enemy had found them. Jake's heart raced as he quickly checked his equipment. He had grenades, a sniper rifle, and a few other Earth weapons that he had picked up along the way. He wasn't sure how effective they would be against the alien forces, but he was willing to give it everything he had. He turned to Zira, his eyes locking with hers. "This is it," he said quietly. "We fight, or we die trying." Zira nodded, her face grim but determined. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength. "Let's do this." Suddenly, a burst of light cut through the darkness as a series of cloaked alien drones appeared, their weapons charging. Without a second thought, Zira activated her energy blade and moved forward, striking the first drone with precision. The alien weaponry was powerful, but Zira's training in the advanced technology of her people gave her the edge. The drone exploded in a burst of sparks and fire, but before she could react, more drones appeared, surrounding them. Jake didn't hesitate. He threw a grenade toward a group of alien soldiers, the explosion lighting up the jungle as it sent soldiers flying. He quickly followed with a sniper shot, taking down another enemy drone from a distance. His heart pounded, his mind racing as he processed the situation with military efficiency. There were too many enemies. He knew they couldn't fight forever. But they had to hold on, just a little longer. Zira was a blur of motion beside him, her energy blade cutting through the air as she moved with supernatural speed. Her combat skills were unlike anything Jake had ever seen, and her alien weapons were deadly, slicing through drones and soldiers with ease. She was a warrior in every sense of the word, and Jake couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for her. She was strong, intelligent, and capable, everything he could hope for in an ally. But even with all her skill and the firepower they had, the odds were stacked against them. More and more alien soldiers appeared, their weapons charging as they closed in. Jake's pulse quickened, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he fired again, taking down another soldier. But it wasn't enough. The enemies kept coming. "We need to get to the ship," Jake shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. The sound of explosions, laser fire, and alien roars filled the air, drowning out everything else. Zyra's face was set in a determined expression as she nodded, moving toward the clearing where the ship was hidden. The cloaking device was their last hope. If they could get to the ship and activate it, they could escape, but they had to make it there first. Jake covered her as best as he could, using every tactic he had learned over the years. He took out more soldiers, his heart racing as he realized they were dangerously close to being overwhelmed. But they kept moving, inching closer to the ship with every passing second. Then, just as it seemed like they might be surrounded, Zyra's ship came to life. The cloaking device hummed to life, and the ship shimmered in the air, becoming nearly invisible. It was their only chance. The ship's doors began to open, but the enemy wasn't far behind. "We need to move now," Jake shouted, his voice urgent. He was starting to feel the weight of exhaustion, his body bruised and battered from the constant combat. But he couldn't stop. Not now. They were so close. Zyra activated the cloaking device again, and they made a break for the ship. But just as they reached the door, a blast of energy hit the ground near them, sending them both tumbling to the dirt. Jake scrambled to his feet, but the explosion had knocked the wind out of him. His vision blurred as he struggled to stay conscious. Zyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed Jake by the arm and hauled him to his feet, pulling him toward the ship. The aliens were closing in fast, and the sound of their weapons charging was deafening. But Zyra's strength was incredible, and despite the explosion, she kept moving. She pulled Jake into the ship just as a hail of energy blasts hit the ground around them. The doors slammed shut, and the ship's engines roared to life, lifting them into the air. The enemy fire couldn't reach them anymore, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jake allowed himself to breathe. They had made it. They had escaped. As the ship ascended into the sky, the jungle below them fading into the distance, Jake looked at Zyra. She was exhausted, but there was a sense of relief in her eyes. "We did it," he said quietly. Zyra's smile was faint, but it was the most genuine one Jake had seen from her yet. "We did," she said. "Thanks to you." Jake looked out at the stars, knowing that the battle was over for now. They had won, but they both knew the war was far from finished. Zyra's enemies would keep coming, but for this moment they had survived. And in a universe full of chaos and danger, that was all they needed. Together, they had fought. Together, they had won. And together, they would face whatever came next. As the stars outside the spaceship flickered, Jake sat in the cockpit, staring out at the vastness of space. The darkness was overwhelming, but in it there was a sense of freedom, of escape. He had fought hard to get here, to survive, and now he was about to embark on something he had never imagined. Beside him, Zyra was going over the ship's systems, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. Her calm presence reassured Jake, even as his mind raced with everything that had happened. The battle was over. They had escaped the alien forces, and for now, they were safe. Zyra had told him that her civilization had many enemies, but the fight was far from finished. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of threats and power struggles. But for the first time, Jake didn't feel overwhelmed by the vastness of it all. Instead, there was a sense of excitement, a spark of curiosity. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one he never would have dreamed of back on Earth. Zyra turned to him, her face serious but soft with a hint of a smile. "Jake, I want to offer you something," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I want you to join me in exploring the galaxy. Earth's humans, they have potential, the kind that no one has ever expected." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "You've proven it to me. You're not just survivors, you're fighters, thinkers, and strategists. Together, we could see the universe, learn from it, and change the course of history." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The idea of leaving Earth, of venturing into the unknown, was both thrilling and terrifying. He had always thought of space as something distant, a place reserved for astronauts and sci-fi dreamers. But now it was real. Zero was offering him a chance to become something more, to be part of something far bigger than anything he had ever known. He looked at her, his mind spinning with the possibilities. You really think we're capable of that? I mean, me, Earth humans, fighting against entire galaxies of alien civilizations. The question felt almost absurd. After everything that had happened, he still couldn't quite believe what he had become a part of. Zara's eyes softened as she met his gaze. I've seen what humans can do when they're pushed to the limit. The way you think, how quickly you adapt. Those are things no one else in the galaxy has. You're unpredictable, and that makes you dangerous. You and the people of Earth could change everything. Jake let out a low laugh, still in disbelief. And you're okay with this? With taking a human like me along for the ride? Zira smiled, her expression shifting to one of admiration. You're more than just a human. You're a force to be reckoned with. I'm not the only one who sees it. The entire galaxy will learn the truth about Earth and its people. I want you by my side as we do that together. Her words sent a wave of emotions crashing over Jake. He had always felt like an ordinary guy, just another soldier trying to survive in a world that seemed too big for him. But now, Zira was telling him that he had the power to shape the future, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. He took a deep breath, his mind made up. All right, Zira, he said with a determined look in his eyes. Let's do it. Let's see what the universe has to offer. But I've got one condition. Zira raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. What's that? Jake grinned. We're going to do things my way too. We'll make our own rules. No one's going to tell us what we can and can't do. Zira's lips curled into a smile, her eyes shining with excitement. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. She moved to the control panel and began activating the ship's engines, the hum of the spacecraft growing louder. The lights around them flickered to life as the ship began to lift off the ground, breaking free from the planet's atmosphere. They were leaving the world they knew behind, venturing into the unknown. It was a moment of total freedom, a sense of wonder and anticipation filling the air. As the ship shot into space, the stars stretched out before them, an endless expanse of possibilities. Jake leaned back in his seat, staring out at the infinite void. The sense of awe he felt was overwhelming. He had always wondered what lay beyond the Earth, but now he was going to see it for himself. This was no longer a dream. This was reality. And Zira was right beside him, ready to face whatever challenges the galaxy threw their way. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt alive. The war was over, but a new battle awaited, one that would take him to the farthest reaches of space, into places no human had ever been before. He was no longer just a soldier on Earth. He was part of something bigger, something extraordinary. And with Zira by his side, he knew he could face anything the universe had in store for them. As the spaceship accelerated through the stars, Zira turned to Jake, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Humans, you're more dangerous than we thought. And I love it. Jake couldn't help but chuckle, a smile spreading across his face. And I've got a feeling this is just the beginning. The stars outside their windows seemed to beckon, their light guiding the way forward. There were so many unknowns, so many places to explore. But with Zira, with this new journey ahead of him, Jake knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And no matter how dangerous or impossible it seemed, they would always find a way to make it through. The ship's engines hummed with power, and the stars outside grew brighter. Jake looked out at the endless expanse of space, his heart racing with excitement. They were free, and the galaxy was theirs to explore. As the spaceship soared into the unknown, the adventure was just beginning. And so, with the power of human courage and Zira's alien wisdom, they set forth into the stars, ready to write their own destiny. Their journey had only just begun.